All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. So here's where we're going to go over this part of the video is basically going over the fuel tank level sender. So in this truck, this 98 truck, the stock fuel tank is not going to be used because that arm gets in the way of it. As you can see, stock fuel tank is gone. Now, to be cheap, and I use cheap loosely because it's getting an aftermarket fuel cell over there. Aftermarket fuel cell. Supposed to go right back there. Fuel tank was down there. Not using it. So, because I don't want to rip apart the dash, I don't want to put an aftermarket fuel gauge in, I want to use the factory working fuel gauge in this truck for the time being. So here's how we're adapting it. Here is a cheap eBay 2-pin, 2-wire, 0 to 190 ohm stock sensor. This is like universal of universal. It's meant for, I think the advertisement meant for a marine boat tank / VW tank / it's also could be a water float sensor. You can see the float on a stock. This is the one I'm using. So I'll kind of put a visual on your screen of the sensor. This is a 98 truck. And per all the parts I could find and spec out the parts, 1991 to 2007, they all pretty much use the same resistance value in the 2-wire to float sensor on the factory fuel tank sender. 10 ohms all the way to 07, 15 ohms to 160. Between there, this sender, if you look at the top of it, spec of it, 190 ohms. Now that's fine, and it does read quite accurate, and we'll show you in a moment. So if you look at my list here, kind of gives you an idea. 91 to 97 uses the same 4-pin flat pin layout. I kind of put a picture on your screen, but I'm not going to give you the pin outs because I don't have that information at this time. 98 to 2000 uses the same plug because it has that fuel tank pressure sender there, which is mostly for the evap emission system. So I'll give you a pin out of the 2 wires you need to wire in this, a float sensor, an ohm float reading sensor, and it has to be 0 to 190 ohms or 0 to 180 ohms depending on what manufacturer makes the sender, because that's how that gauge in the dash reads the fuel tank level. So 98 to 2000 uses that same 8-pin plug because of the fuel tank pressure sender. In 2001, from what I can gather, the plug changes to a round 4-pin that kind of looks like the 8-pin, but it only has 4 slots in it. 2 are for the fuel pump, which is power and ground, and then 2 are for the fuel tank sending level sender. Don't have a pin out of that. I'll kind of give you a picture of it if I can. I believe in 04 to 07 they changed it again to a flat pin, but it's a more modern pin size. It's not like the old 91 to 97. They went back to a 4-pin and they got rid of the fuel tank pressure sender. Then in 08 the ohm resistance changed. So 08 is 180 ohms empty, 10 ohms full. So if you look here, this is the ohm resistance for empty, ohm resistance for full. 91 to 07, basically the same spec. Per the parts and their specifications I've looked up, that's what it is. So I have this RCI, I think it's RCI, 32-gallon fuel tank. I got an adapter to put the fuel pump in the fuel tank instead of that one. So that hole was cut. And the fuel tank sender is going to get sandwiched between a plate, 5 10 by 24 machine screws. There's a gasket between the plastic tank, the metal lid, and then there'll be another gasket for the fuel tank sender and the metal lid. Just like this one has a gasket here, there's another one underneath the plate, and then you have the plastic tank, and then you have the backing ring. There's a backing ring for this that I created. Drill a hole, the float goes in there, I can seal it up in there. That's basically the fuel tank, and the fuel tank basically has a plastic liner in this metal casing, which that's for that. So here, give you a pin out of this plug of the 2 wire. Okay, so future me here doing a voiceover interjection. The 2 pins you see there, it does not matter which wires from the float sensor, the 2 wires from the float sensor, goes on the 2 pins there. All that matters is the 2 wires from the float sender connect to those 2 pins on the chassis harness on the picture that you can see in the corner. That's the only thing that matters. Nothing else matters. One's power, one's ground. I don't know which is which, but all that matters is those 2 pins are connected to the 2 wires on the float sensor. That's all I want to interject here. It's something I should have said when I recorded this, but you have it now. So that's the way it should be set up. Connect to those 2 pins and you'll be golden. You need to plug into a factory, basically the factory harness to make the factory gauge work. All you need to change is your 2 wires to some sort of level sender that has 0 to 190 or 180 ohms for your tank level sender. Right now, this is on empty. You can look inside. The key is on. I am past empty. I am definitely empty. So, to give you kind of an idea on how this sensor operates, or at least the gauge operates, this tank, well, the float in the tank, because of fuel sloshing, you're always going to see this move about fast. Because of tank sloshing, this is going to always be moving fast up and down, especially where I'm going to have it in the tank, especially in a tank with no bafflings. You're going to get fuel tank slosh. This is going to move all over the place real fast, and it's going to, if the gauge isn't designed to move slowly, you're going to see it bounce around like a pogo stick. It's quite going to be distracting. So what you have to understand is the factory fuel gauge, I'm going to move this to full for the time being. The factory fuel gauge actually moves over time. And the more I talk here, you're going to see it slowly move. So this gauge kind of averages out the ohm resistance rating. And you can kind of see it slowly move up. It's getting closer to E. If we waited here 5 minutes, it would probably go to full, but I'm not going to do that. So if you cycle the key, it'll immediately go to full because that's how it's designed to. It will immediately go to wherever the float is when you cycle the key. Now, here's something you're going to have to understand on how this fuel tank gauge works. For diagnostic purposes, if you put this down at empty, if you unplug this sender, if you unplug it, which I'll try and do one-handed to show you. Get a visual where the gauge is. It should go 4. Yeah, it moved way past full. So, because there is no resistance between those two wires, technically it would read OL, infinite resistance. If you unplug that sender, and the tank goes, and the gauge goes all the way past full there, that's what it's designed to do. Now, I don't have a wire to short out these wires, but if you put an actual, like if you tied these two wires together, and be mindful, I'll have in the corner the 2 pins that you need to. If you short out these 2 wires together to make no resistance between this, you can go back to the gauge, and the key's off. Now, without, turn the key on, goes right to empty. Now, if you short those 2 wires out, this gauge should go to empty, no resistance. That's what it's designed to do. That is the purpose. So this is how this gauge is supposed to behave. And when you move the float bowl, or the float, with the key on, it will slowly move to where that float is if you leave it there for like 5 to 10 minutes, but I'm not going to bore you with that. So that's how that works. Right here, this was $20. This fuel tank level sender for eBay was $20. This was from, I think, work. This little 2-pin connector harness. It is also, I think, like $25. It's got this protective coating and the plugs already on it. And then I have more plugs that I got for a few bucks. So all in all, I think there was about $50, and very easy to adapt this chassis from the factory fuel tank sender to an aftermarket fuel tank sender for going in an aftermarket tank. I didn't have to worry about messing with the cab wiring, the factory dash, nothing. So, basically I am utilizing and optimizing the chassis harness, factory dash, factory fuel gauge. All I changed was this right here and how it plugs into the factory harness to then get aftermarket fuel tank and this aftermarket gauge that's going to go in that fuel tank together to run the gauge. The fuel pump is on another story. That would be a whole different one. Basically, for the next video or whatever it is, these 2 wires I don't trust to run the fuel pump because I'm getting a higher capacity fuel pump, which in turns can increase the electrical load on these wires, and I don't trust these wires. So these wires are just going to go to some relay somewhere around here, and a relay is going to be powered to then switch on the actual fuel pump that's going to be in the tank. The PCM actually monitors this circuit, and right now I have a code for the fuel pressure fuel pump circuit open. I forget what the code is for. I'll talk about this in another video, but basically right now, because the fuel pump is not connected, I have a fuel pump code. But these are literally going to be connected to a relay, which is only just going to power a relay to power a higher amperage fuel pump, Walro 450, I think it is. It might not be that much high amperage from a stock fuel pump, but I just don't trust to run that fuel pump on these factory tiny wires. That happening, it's going to get its own dedicated circuit right back here from the battery to the fuel pump and back. And those wires are just going to run a relay, so basically from this point forward, I haven't messed with any of the wiring. I'm just messing with this connector, this pin out, and I'll give you the pin out plug on your screen too. And it's basically wired into this fuel tank level, and then it'll go to a relay for the fuel pump. But that's later down the road. So yeah, all these Rangers have this resistance value to the years to 2011 to the last one. So I looked up all the parts, got the specification of the parts. I written this down to give you kind of an observation. 91 to 97 has the same connector, then it changes. 98 to 2000 has the same connector, then it changes again. 01 to 03, same connector, then it changes again. To 04 to 07 has the same connector, and I believe it changes again in 08. But they're all, I don't remember for sure. I kind of have a picture of the connector, but I don't have any information for the pinouts for you. I'm sorry. But this should give you a good idea on how I'm messing with this in order to get a factory fuel gauge to work with an aftermarket tank and aftermarket sender. That's pretty much it. So if this explanation kind of helps you, let me know. So this was kind of a lot of talking, but a kind of a lot of information to how the factory vehicle functions. So let me know if this helps you, and have a good day.